Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman family JCC is an incubator for new expressions of Jewish identity. It creates innovative Jewish learning, celebrations, and arts programs that inspire personal connections to people and ideas from across the Jewish world. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 155, The Women's March. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And today we're excited to host not one, not two, but three guests. They are the three women who were recently appointed to the steering committee of the Women's March. In a blog post explaining why they are joining the Women's March, they say, "We're marching because, as Jewish women of color and as a transgender Jewish woman, we are committed to addressing anti-Black racism and transphobia in Jewish communities and beyond. We believe in the power, importance, and potential of this intersectional, women-led opposition movement. We are excited to have been welcomed into this historic coalition as Jewish leaders." We're releasing this episode just about a week or so after the second anniversary of the Trump presidency, and therefore the second anniversary of the very first Women's March, which took place the day after Donald Trump's inauguration as President of the United States. Let me give a little bit of introduction of our three guests, one of whom has been a previous guest, and two of whom we hope very much will be future guests. Our first guest, who was also our guest on episode 90, is April Baskin. Until recently, she was the vice president of Audacious Hospitality for the Union for Reform Judaism, the URJ. She recently left that position and currently manages an independent diversity, equality, and inclusion consulting practice working primarily with Jewish communities and college campuses. Our second guest, Yavilah McCoy, has been a leader in the Jewish community, particularly focusing on support for Jewish and multiracial families. She founded an organization called Yavilah, which worked on these issues. After directing Yavilah for 8 years, Yavilah became the New England director of the Curriculum Initiative, a nonprofit educational consultancy. And now she is the CEO and executive director of Dimensions Educational Consulting, which provides training and resources that equip and inspire leaders to be more effective in achieving diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And our third guest is Abby Stein. She is a transgender activist, a Jewish educator, writer, and speaker. Abby Stein was born and raised in a Hasidic family, and she was in the news a few years ago when she came out as transgender. She talks about herself being the first openly transgender woman raised in a Hasidic community, and has also joked that she's the first and only ultra-Orthodox ordained female rabbi, having received a rabbinical degree before leaving the ultra-Orthodox community and coming out as transgender. Abby Stein is working on a book which is slated to come out next fall, and we're hoping that we'll have her on again around then to talk about that fascinating book. But until then, let's jump into this conversation and welcome April Baskin, Yavilah McCoy, and Abby Stein to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you all on to talk about such an important and timely issue.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
So I think the best place to get started would just be to get a little bit of the story, Yavilah, about how you came to be part of the leadership of the Women's March and appointed to the steering committee.
Well, I've been involved in conversations with both Tamika Mallory and Linda Sarsour over the course of the past 2 years in regard to bringing them into deeper conversation with Jews of color and the ways in which the controversy that the Women's March has been engaged in has impacted Jews of color, and our organizing and our consistent participation in social justice circles. This idea of being able to speak face-to-face and in relationship characterizes the way in which we organize as Jewish social justice activists and people of color. We really deeply believe in restorative justice principles. And so the idea of being face-to-face and listening to someone and learning from them and then figuring out how we can take action together makes sense. And so as things came up, it was always very important for me and the collective that I lead within to be in conversation with Tamika and Linda and to be sure that we were hearing them fully in regard to what they cared about and that they were hearing us fully in regard to what we cared about in the current moment. And so I've been in conversations, I think, that go back close to 2 to 3 years regarding how we're going to be able to figure out that we can walk as one. And in this moment, as Jews of color continue to organize and find their voice in this space within the Women's March, it was important for us to be able to do that in conversation. And I think that's what led the Women's March leadership to think of us and our intersectional approach.
Tell us a little bit about how you think we ought to be thinking about what the Women's March is, what it's all about, what its goals are. And also, can you talk a little bit about the concept of intersectionality and how it's specifically applied to the leadership of the Women's March? Because I think there's some confusion about that, about intersectional identities. And can you help us and our listeners understand what that really means in the deepest way?
I was at the 2017 Women's March, and I came with a contingent of Jews of color to the 2017 Women's March. When we got there, we were with 3 million women. When you would look up the street, it looked like snow. There were that many women out there, all with signs, all speaking in their own voices, but also moving in solidarity to say that this is a moment where we need to stand together to ask for justice for women all over our country and women all over the world. That was an intersectional action because we all came from so many different lived experiences. And we all came from different walks of life and different politics. And you could see it in the signs that people were holding. But something about what we all needed in this moment brought us together into the street to be able to stand up for our lives and to stand up for our bodies and to stand up for our way of life and to stand up for our truth. I don't think that in movement building, when it's really being done well, you have a choice but to be intersectional. Because if we're going to say that women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights, the intersections of how our humanities come together to be able to affirm that is true must be held. And I think that that has to be true across all movement building. I feel like the way in which the Women's March now has invited, I think it's over close to how many people are on our steering committee now? 23?
There are 33 people currently.
33. There's 33 different women coming from a vast expanse of activist experience and a vast expanse of lived experience. And the one thing that I think you can see in the ways in which we were chosen is that we are all speaking from a place of understanding what it means to be marginalized in our communities and what it means to stand up for all women regardless. Now, you can find all sorts of women across the country who are doing that. I will testify that every woman that has been invited to the steering committee of the Women's March has figured out a way through her voice and action to stand up both for their lived experience and the lived experiences of all women and our common need for justice across all of us.
I just want to add something to that. I also think what I was so impressed in, yes, I mean, there are maybe a few women on the steering committee who would fit the description of like white Christian women, but even they and pretty much everyone on the steering committee are women who have in their lives dealt with intersectionality, who have their life is themselves. Like I know for myself, for example, I'm a Jewish, queer, trans woman who grew up in a fundamentalist religious background without an education, and like all of these things come together. And like I know in my own life, I've had to juggle these intersectionalities, and it's something that I'm still juggling. And ultimately, I think we all, literally all of us, have this understanding of in our own lives and in the communities that we've been working on how much the intersection of all of our identities come together to make who we are and to support our work. I find it very interesting, but in my own life, for example, the fact that I am a trans woman who also comes from a Jewish and very religious background has not just given me the opportunity and like isn't standing in my way to fight for all trans people and for all women. It actually, I think, amplifies it. It gives me the opportunity to push for it from an understanding that this is the only way that it can happen for myself and for so many other people. And it helps. I mean, for me, I like to joke sometimes that the media is so interested in my story, and I know, but I don't think there's something interesting about me. I mean, I was just born in a family. I was just born in that background. It's just totally by chance that my before and after picture looks slightly more radical than most before and after pictures. But what that has done in turn, and the way I like to approach that, is that this is giving me, not just that it's not hindering my opportunity, my ability to try to advocate for everyone, it's helping it. And I think this is just a micro example of the bigger picture in the world, that our intersectional identities are not just not getting in the way of fighting for all women, fighting for feminism. It's helping, it's amplifying it, it's encouraging it even more.
I think, feminism has always taught the personal is political and the political is personal. That goes as far back as the beginning of our work as women. And I think the intersectional is personal and the intersectional is political too. There's a way in which people take pictures of folks who people can visibly see as different, and they believe that the inclusion of those pictures or the inclusion of that embodiment in some way means we're doing the work of being intersectional as a movement. And that is so not true. That the work is actually relationship. The work is actually sitting down and being uncomfortable and watching your intersections play out across various different needs for justice, across various ways in which we're impacted by the lack of justice, and being willing to stay tied, bound to one another, regardless. That is the work of intersectionality. And I think Jews doing that work and figuring out how the ways in which we're impacted by anti-Semitism connects to the ways in which other targeted communities are impacted as well. And having that narrative in our mouths and in our bodies is what brings Jews into relationship with intersectionality. We can't be singly implicated by the need for justice. Justice does not occur in a silo, and neither does injustice. So as Jews, if there's an injustice that we're experiencing in the context of the presence of anti-Semitism being an ongoing evil in the world, then we also have to be connected to the ways in which that evil is connected to other evils that have been proliferated in this moment that we have to be equally committed to ending. And that opportunity comes from being in relationship in movement spaces.
So interestingly, when I hear people talk about the Women's March, there's two subtly different pronunciations, and I don't accentuations or emphases. Some people seem to be saying Women's March, emphasis on the march, Women's March, and others are saying Women's March, emphasis on the women's. And I mean, you could look at that as just a quirky, interesting thing about how people talk, which, fine, great. I've been thinking about what that reflects about on the one hand. Oh, this is a collection. This is a way of amplifying the voices of women, specifically women, amplifying the voices of women, Women's March, and the fashion in which they're doing it is through marching. Okay, so that's one. And then the other parallel is that this is a march of all the strategies in the universe. The activism is taking its form, its shape through a march. And it could be a conversation. It could be some other modality, but it's a march. And that march is a march that's centering the voices of women. So I guess what I'm getting at is, for you, when you hear that phrase, Women's March, why is it that we need so specifically and clearly a women's march right now? So that's the women's part. And why is it that we're marching? Why is it that it's taking the form of a march as opposed to some other modality?
There's a significant level of course correction that's needed in this country that's going to require us literally getting out of our seats and getting out into the street and meeting other people and making sure in every way possible that we're making ourselves, our bodies, what's important to us via signs and the messages that we say, seen and heard by the world. And that's really important because as women, that's a key healthy contradiction to the oppression that women consistently experience around erasure, invisibility, and silencing that happens to women. So I think that marching has its place in general, and I think specifically for women, it's critically important because it makes it clear that we're not going anywhere, that issues matter to us, and it's an excellent early step. It's not the first step, because as organizers know, it takes a lot to get people out to a march, but it's a wonderful way of galvanizing us into action and for us to connect and see each other. I know one of the reflections that was happening again and again about this year's march in DC is that it was really a very diverse intersectional group. And that's something that marching allows us to see and participate in, and gives us energy for the work ahead. And as we've seen through the Women's March, even despite the controversy that in terms of organizing around Kavanaugh and other issues and the women's wave and voting women into office, that their work is still impactful. And I think that another key contradiction that a march provides is that it deeply contradicts the isolation that people are feeling, and lets people know that when they go back to their homes, that there are thousands and millions of women all across the country who are also concerned too. We may not hear it over the media or see it directly in our living rooms, but we know there are other women and allies out there like that. And so I think that's the important place that a march serves. It's not the end all, but it is a really critically important component of it.
Let me, I guess, approach that from two perspectives, exactly why I think and why in my personal life, I think both the women's part and the march part is so important. And then we can talk about in a broader context of what's happening here. Let me give you a simple example. Literally, the Supreme Court, I guess, let go, because they haven't really said anything yet, but just let go an injunction by a lower federal court that put an injunction on, for all intents and purposes, I don't even like calling him the president, the person living in the White House, his transgender ban. And I know a lot of people call it a transgender military ban, but I'm calling it a transgender ban intentionally, because I don't think, and I think most of us know that, the concern here is not the military. The concern here is no one's safety and no one's financial stability. I think we've all seen the numbers, like the fact that even with the most expensive cause that it could have been, has on the military, doesn't even register on any radar. It's a joke. It's very clear that this was a way to both talk to the base of people, the base of haters who support the specific administration because of their anti-LGBT policies, and in general, it's a way of telling the transgender community, "F you," for the lack of a better word. It's a way of being, we want to hurt you, and here's a way that the executive could actually do that. I don't want you in the military. I personally have no interest in ever serving in the military. I do respect our military. I think it has a lot of issues and a lot of amazing things, but people should have the ability to do that. It's just one example of so many things that have been happening constantly in the last few years. And I don't think no one is denying that we're standing better now than we did 100 years ago, for example. But I know that we have the opportunity to do better, and this is giving us an opportunity. Coming out and marching is giving us an opportunity to, first and foremost, to rally together. It brings people together. I personally credit the Women's March 2017 and 2018 with a lot of what happened during the midterm elections this year. A lot of women who have been standing up, the record amount of women who are running for office, who have run the last few years, who will run in the future. It's working. A march is working. A march is showing it's showing our strength, but it's also it's encouraging people. It's enraging people in a good way to be that we have to come together. And it also is very importantly a show of power. When we had the first Women's March on all 7 continents, it was a show to the US government, to all our local governments, and to everyone in the world that you can't play around with us. We are here, we have millions of people who will take over the streets, and we are ready to do what has to be done. And obviously the women's part is perhaps even the more important part of it, where our voices, we've gotten to a point where thankfully so much of the struggles that we had in the last century are less institutionalized as it is. Women have gotten the right to vote. Women have gotten there are some women in Congress. We have gotten to a point where we have accomplished some things on the ground, and we just need to come to to get it across the finish line. We need to all come together and push for it in a very public, in a very strong way.
I mean, the only thing I would add to that, Abby, is that, my work in terms of activism is about helping us as Jews to understand embodiment And when I say embodiment, it means that there's ways in which cognitively we can discuss the politics of our times and the injustices of our times and try to gain an understanding in our minds of what's happening to people. And then there's a way that you understand things and the need for justice in your body. And many people come to understand the need for justice in their bodies by being targeted in their bodies. And the truth in our times right now, that the categories of women who are most targeted in their bodies by injustice are trans women and indigenous women. Those are the two highest categories of bodily injustice, meaning being killed and exposed to, violence, are these two groups of women. And so when I talk, I try not to talk too much about things that I'm not willing to put my body inside of and try to feel for the sake of empathy, compassion, and the ability to act in solidarity. When you go to a march, one of the things that's beautiful about a march is that you literally are standing shoulder to shoulder with the people who are with you and who are using their voices loudly to say, this matters to me too. But the other thing is a march also gives you a chance to use your voice in a way that you can't deny beyond the march. I mean, I love my Jewish people. I'm just going to say I love my Jewish people. They're my people forever and ever. And both at the 2017 march and at this march, I found myself running up and down our delegation, trying to get people to shout and sing and say the chants. And often I would run into somebody's face and they would look at me like, what? You actually want me to scream? And I'm like, yeah, say it loud, say it proud. Come on, let's do it together, right? So embodiment is also allowing your voice to come from your kishkas, like from the deep of your guts, out into the world. It's not enough for it to just be said around the Shabbos table or even around your boardroom table. You need to actually get out in the world and use your voice, because once it comes out of you, even our tradition teaches that words, speech, are the highest form of realization. There's machshaba, right? There's dibor, and then there's maaseh, the thought, the words, and then action. If you don't move through those three levels, how are we actually going to actually make change and transformation in the world? So yes, march. Please get out and march. Please shout and scream. And I think I'm going to tell you something that was so beautiful. When we came as a delegation of Jewish women of color to this march, there were, I think, close to 1 million people out there this time too. And we had to literally part the seat. The marshals were leading us in, and we were told that we would be at the front of the march. But how are we going to get to the front of the march? So they literally had to get people to move, to make space for us. And as they were making space for us to move to the front of the march, there were lots of Jewish women of color who were crying, literally crying, because they had not only not ever experienced in their bodies the feeling of being asked to come to the front, but also the parting of people with love, with people saying things like, the Jews are here. As we came through with love and appreciation and pride. And so when we got to the front of the march and we were standing at the front of the march singing, Olam Chesed Yibaneh, we will create a world with love. You will not be able to take that kind of commitment to justice out of the bodies of anybody who stood with us on that day ever. That's something you cannot give to people in a book. That's not something you can offer people in a speech. That's something that went into their bodies.
I just want to add, there's a big difference between tolerance and celebration. People like to talk a lot about tolerating LGBT people, tolerating transgender people. And I say tolerance is for lactose, There are people who tolerate lactose. There are people who don't tolerate lactose. You don't tolerate people, you celebrate people.
I am deeply, deeply, fully in love with that lactose intolerance analogy idea. That's amazing. I'm going to quote you on it in the future. Tolerance is not enough. That's for lactose. We need to be fully beyond that. We need to be thinking about how to celebrate. I love that, love that, love that. Okay, everybody listening, write it down, tell your friends. Cool. Question time. Next question. Because we've gotten a really great snapshot from Yavilah of this, of singing Olam Chesed Yibaneh and building a world of love, and building a world of love. I was curious if we could just get maybe a little bit more on that front to draw a picture in our heads of what this march looked like. So maybe April, what's a snapshot of the Women's March that you think distills some of the most exciting, powerful dynamics that were at play here that you can share with us to help us get a better sense of really what it looked like?
We were this gorgeously diverse group, a powerful and joyous group of people who were singing chants like, that still make me so happy. Tell me what community looks like. This is what community looks like. Tell me what the Jews look like. This is what the Jews look like. And for all of us as this multiracial group to be singing this chant and going through the crowd to this Afrocentric beat that we're all simultaneously grooving to, everyone was just like, whoa, this is a thing. It was a culmination of a lot of work that came together really beautifully in this moment. The way that I described it in my reflection, especially when you put it in the context of some of the broader pain and confusion and awful media coverage that's been happening. There's also been some nice media coverage, but there's been a lot of, more than I've seen in my career in the Jewish community, so much misinformation, just blatant misinformation that's being accepted. And that to me, we were like a lotus flower in the mud with all of these petals just beaming, and people were like, wow, that's like a really beautiful lotus flower in the mud. We're just going to let it lotus. And they just like let us lotus and cleared the path. And it was really joyous and wonderful.
The fact that Jewish women of color, if Women's March was like, okay, we'll be in the front, but just behind the steering committee, I don't think anyone would have complained. But no, they were like, no, we need you guys in the front. We need you guys to be as visible as possible. That has shown me that these are people that want to do the work, people who want to have these deep conversations and are listening to us.
So obviously, I'm thinking about some of the concerns and controversies that have come up in terms of the Women's March in this current iteration. And I've been trying really hard when people ask me, well, are you going to go to the Women's March, et cetera, to say, look, I think that you have to understand coalitions as complex things, and that, at least for me, one of the dimensions of the Women's March is that it's the most well-organized, largest, most effective way for us to express our horror at the state of our country and at the man who is the president, who is has such a long laundry list of horrible things that, including, aid and comfort to anti-Semites who actually are out there trying to hurt Jews, that I feel like it seems pretty straightforward to me that we can be in coalition easily. I mean, to me, it's a little bit not even a hard question, but that we can be in coalition with the wide variety of other groups who feel at risk and who are at risk from this president and everything that he represents and all of those who he's working with. That said, I wonder if there's an even deeper level that you can help us take this, in that, as I was thinking about who the three of you are, I was thinking that you all in different ways have been essentially speaking to the majority of the Jewish community in America, basically Jews who are white, and saying that, you say things that are racist. You say things and do things that are transphobic. This is built into the fabric of our Jewish community, and nevertheless, we want to be in coalition with you. And so it feels to me that it's pretty much the same story. It's saying, yeah, maybe certain people have said things that they shouldn't have said, but that's not a reason not to be in coalition with them if there are larger things at stake.
Yeah, so this, as you've already articulated somewhat from your question, thank you, Dan, coalition work is so vitally important, and it's incredibly scary. And I think there are several things that there's some as we do this work, like lots of areas of our lives, it requires some investment and some building of new muscles that we need to really strengthen in order to do this work effectively. And often I've been fortunate to be a part of some of the closed-door private conversations between Linda and Tamika and members of the Jewish community. Something that's become really clear to me from a number of those conversations is, yes, talking across lines of difference is important, but there's actually just wells of conversation and healing that's needed with just internal conversations among the Jewish community about these issues of working through what this moment is kicking up. Because right now, I think that there's a lack of distinction happening on a number of fronts. There's a lack of distinction among danger. I think some of the strength that Yavilah, Abby, and I bring are as people who have been intensely targeted by not only anti-Semitism, but racism and transphobia and other issues that have had to invest deeply in our healing along the way and clarify deeply our identity and who we are in light of those different dynamics. We're real clear, not always, but often we have a much better sense of being able to determine degrees of danger. And we can tell the difference between someone's unconscious bias versus someone trying to kill us versus being able to distinguish the terror that we're feeling that's latent, that's coming from the White House, that's showing up in conversations with other people that actually isn't about that other person, but about what's happening in the air. And I've heard a lot of people talking about confusion. Often that's a sign that there's oppression at play, that there's an unhealed part of ourselves, of some old pain from targeting that we got before that didn't get healed, that's not allowing us to see clearly in this moment, which is not a judgment at all. It's just a factual observation that we are a people who have been deeply targeted, who, like many groups of people, because I come to this in part being very aware of my Jewish experience and also having read a lot and studied a lot of the scholarship of some Black scholars who talk about post-traumatic slavery syndrome. Joy Leary-DeGruy talks about this in a way that I think is quite similar to Jews. One of my favorite lines from one of her talks, she says, at no point was there a healing process for Black people in this country, and our trauma has been pathologized, but we need to pause and not judge ourselves and realize that at no point when we were stolen did we get help and taken to another continent. And then we were enslaved for almost 300 years in this country. And then we went through lynchings. And then we went through, Jim Crow. And at no point did a large group of social workers come in and say, wow, this has been really traumatizing. We should all sit down and let you process for hours, months, weeks, what you need to, because right now you've developed a bunch of different habits and skills that were really helpful for surviving that oppression, but it's not helpful right now. And you could say the same things about Jews around deeply ingrained practices that we have that can be completely respected because they've helped us survive pogroms and the Shoah for those who did. And this is also a new moment. And there are actually many people in this movement who want to be our allies and help us, and to be able to distinguish between oppression versus ignorance and people looking to learn. And that is complicated work. And so some of that is going to take us developing more skills so that we can show up effectively. And also similarly, to be clear, everyone who's in that coalition work needs to do a similar kind of work from their vantage point and their different identities. And I know that's idealistic, but I actually think that's what this moment calls for.
So we are arcing towards the close, and that makes me sad because this has been really, really beautiful and captured a lot of important topics. But we are arcing towards the close. And so as we do, I just really would love to open the floor for each one of you to just offer what's a key takeaway for you individually, and hopefully that could be transmitted to our listeners as they're looking to apply lessons of the Women's March to their own individual lived experience and also to the world that we want to shape.
I'm asking our family and community to really pay attention to the way in which there's an intersection between anti-Semitism and racism. There's ways in which just in the last 2 weeks, the comments, the things that people have been saying online. I mean, I hope that we will hold anti-Semitism and racism, anti-Semitism and transphobia, anti-Semitism and sexism, anti-Semitism and patriarchy, anti-Semitism and all of these various oppressions that should be a part of what we're calling social justice together, not as a shame, blame strategy, as an opportunity for us to learn more. Because when someone sees me and April and Abby standing in front of 1 million people speaking our truth, I want them to feel like Jewish women are speaking their truth. When they see us sitting at tables doing this work, I want them to be inspired to continue to do that work. I don't want to see a lot of what I've been seeing all across the internet and in other places where people are opting out of the work because for some reason their lived experience does not cause them to see Jewish womanhood in the bodies that are standing in front of them right now leading. That is a shame for our community. It's a way in which our community can and will do better. And I'm in for the work of making sure that, yes, we stand in solidarity, and yes, we get to the tables of justice, and yes, we do the work as a community to make sure we have all of us all the time in leadership doing the work together.
What's so important, what I want to sing from the rooftops is stay engaged. Specifically to my Jewish people, stay engaged in the conversation. I was taught when I was a little girl by my father to not accept messages from the media wholesale. This is something I've learned since I was a toddler from my Black and Native heritage Jewish father. You know, he said that when he had time in his mid-20s, he used to purchase multiple newspapers and read them and study the distinctions in different stories and notice the different narratives that were being told. And so that painted a really clear picture for me around how I needed to be a student of this work and be really mindful and slow. And so I would ask people to be really to kind of do a 180. And when the terror level gets so high, particularly after the tragedy and murder at Tree of Life, that we are just accepting certain things as safe places. And some of those things aren't safe places for a lot of people in terms of different authors and media outlets, and to be really careful. One of the constant misquotings that I'm still baffled that it's just shared now as if it's fact is this constant, even in progressive spaces, that the misquoting of people saying that Linda Sarsour said that you cannot be a Zionist and a feminist. She never said that. She never said that. She said, I have a hard time believing that far right-wing Zionists can be engaged in feminism, can be feminists. It's a very different statement than saying Zionists cannot be feminists. So what I would say is that it may be hard, but even if, which is not the case, even if there was some nefarious effort happening or something was happening, I'm not saying you have to be happy about it or say everything's great, but we got to stay engaged. One of the core attributes of anti-Semitism, one of the core impacts of anti-Semitism is isolation. And we can't allow ourselves to be isolated or distance from this critical work, because what will happen is what's already happened in the past few years is that something else is going to come up. And then we're not going to be in the conversation. We're going to be upset about that impact. I see it playing out now in different interviews. We need to remain in the conversation and strive for not transactional, but transformational relationships across lines of difference, and take time to invest in those relationships.
Here's the first thing that I would say, and I know it hasn't been mentioned yet on this conversation. I think it's important. This year's march wasn't just a rally, it wasn't just a march. A rally and a march are really important, but there's something really important that happened here that I think unfortunately almost went under the radar because of all the controversy, which again, not really controversy, but as that has been the way it has been framed, which is the policy agenda. I've studied public policy. I've read a lot of policy memos in the last few years in school and work, and like a lot of like proposed bills. And I think the most comprehensive and yes, radical in the best way possible agenda that I've seen put together has been this Women's March policy agenda. That is what we should focus on. The controversy happened. No one is questioning now, whatever, not we gonna march. Can we like get that aside for a second? And let's focus on that. Let's make sure that we all reach out to our representatives. We make sure that they're all aware of that and that we start implementing them. everything that's going on, from like justice reform to Medicare for all, and so many other amazing points. It's available online. It's open to everyone. Everyone can see it. Let's put it this way. If I have to give a call to action right now, something that came out of the Women's March, look on it, find a part that you feel passionate about and get involved. Whatever it will be, canvassing, will come to vote candidates who support that, for bills, for petitions. I think if we have learned one thing in 2018 is that being engaged with politics does work, and that we can both vote in people that we can pass through so much legislation. I think the fact that even though that Republicans/conservatives had control of all three of both houses in Congress and of the White House for 2 years, and they didn't manage to repeal the Affordable Care Act, so they unfortunately managed to hit a lot of nails into it, but did not manage, is in part for the fact that people kept on calling, people kept on protesting and showing up. We can do that, and we should do that. You don't have to be a professional. You don't have to be an activist. You don't have to be anything to do that. I think only someone who isn't blind didn't see that during the march this year, there's been a lot of awareness about the struggles that Jewish people as a whole go through, specifically Jewish people of color, queer Jewish people, and so on. We pretty much have the stage right now, and it's a time for us to make sure that our concerns are being heard, but at the same time, that we also listen to other people's concerns, that we come together, because I've seen that in my own life, and I know it's true for everyone. Intersectionality is not just a catchy phrase. Even more so, it's not just the right thing to do morally. It's something that works, and it's something that we can all come together. There is so much that we had actually get to, and I think the Jewish community, unfortunately, for quite some time, has been almost napping. Like I, for example, always knew that anti-Semitism is big. I always knew that the FBI gets hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of reports a year of anti-Semitic activity here in the U.S., but even myself, people have been like, yeah, okay, but listen, no one is killing us in the streets. And even I think Jewish people and Jewish women that have been involved in doing social justice action, that has changed. Maybe not in the streets, but we have to come together. And here is a ready-made list of the allies. The entire Women's March, the entire steering committee, all the people involved are allies waiting to listen to us of what else they can do to help us. And at the same time, we are all here to listen to them, to listen to everyone, what else we can do.
Thank you, all three of you, for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure. I really appreciate the thoughtful questions and the work that you do in the world through this podcast. Thank you so much.
And a big thank you, of course, to all of you out there listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'd love you to check it out again in the future. We want to close out the episode by encouraging you to be in touch with us, and there are a wide variety of ways for you to do that. First, you can head to our Facebook page, Judaism Unbound. Second, you can always hit us up on Twitter at Judaism Unbound. That's our handle. Third, you can go to our website, JudaismUnbound.com. And last but not least, you can hit us up via email at dan@JudaismUnbound.com and lex@JudaismUnbound.com. I'll just say that lately we've been getting really, really awesome questions and thoughts and all sorts of good stuff in our inboxes. So keep on sending those. It really keeps us excited and energized, and very often contributes to what the content is in our future episodes. The last request we like to make is that if you could support us with a financial donation, we are always incredibly grateful for that. And you can do that at JudaismUnbound.com/donate with either a monthly recurring gift or a one-time donation. So thanks so much for listening. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.